Hi, I'm Kira. I do the animations you see on this channel, and this video will be a bit different than usual animation logs. I'll start with some general announcements and then jump into talking specifically about the Cypher 3 animation. I'll answer some frequently asked questions about the video, and afterwards I'm going to do a full explanation of how I made the video from the draft to the final product, and my thoughts and techniques along the way. At the very end of the video, I'll have a little present to show you in case the technical jargon isn't your thing. There will be a time code and annotation at the end of the FAQ section to jump to it. First off, I just want to thank you all for the support on Cypher and in the channel in general. I wasn't expecting the Blood, Sweat, and Tears log to get as much attention as it did, so thank you for that as well. I noticed I passed over 20,000 subscribers, which is really wild, and thank you for enjoying my art and sharing it. I've updated my About tab with some general info about the programs and hardware I use in case you forget, and I'll also mention it in this video. I've also opened a shop on Redbubble where you can get some stuff that I've made, including Cypher-themed things like a sprite sheet of all the poses and frames from the video, as well as stickers. I also recommend you check out my Tumblr or my Twitter if you want to keep updated with what I do. I also have an Instagram I sometimes update, and all of these are linked in the description. Now, let's move on to some questions I saw on the Cypher 3 video and in general. First off, what programs do you use to animate? I draw everything in Photoshop, and most of the animations I upload stay in Photoshop. Cypher 3 heavily used After Effects, and in general, when stuff gets complex, I use After Effects. I also use Premiere for editing sound or clips together, and I'm currently using OBS to capture the footage you see in this video. What hardware do you have? I work on a Dell XPS 15, and I use a Wacom Intuos pen and touch medium. They don't carry it anymore, and I think it's the 2015 model. You should send Cypher 3 to BTS. If you haven't gone back to the video's comments or followed me elsewhere, it did get to them. During an interview with Rolling Stone India, the interviewer mentioned the animation to Namjoon, and he asked for a link to it, so it got to them. I'll link to the interview in the description. It's a really good read, both as somebody who's new to BTS or as somebody who's already an ARMY. Do more animations, or will you animate XYZ? I have a couple things on my plate already, so there's no need to suggest anything. I will say, as a general rule, songs that already have MVs, visualizers, trailers, I won't touch those. I got requests to do Come Back Home or Boy Meets Evil, and those already have MVs, so I'm not gonna work with them. I'd like to specifically say at the moment I don't have plans on approaching Cypher 4 or Cypher 2, just because the beat and composition don't resonate me to animate as much as 3 did. That's not to say I don't like the songs, because I love them, but as of right now, I just don't have any ideas on what to do with them, but I have inspiration elsewhere. Can I post Cypher 3 on this site? My general rule is if you can embed the YouTube player into the site, you're A-okay. You don't need to ask me. If you need to download the video and upload it to get it onto the site, I'd like you to email me using the email in my About page just to let me know. So that's all for the questions. Again, I'd suggest you follow me on Twitter or Tumblr if you want to see more of my work more often. I've been doing stuff like doodles after Bon Voyage episodes, for example, and it's a great way to get my attention. So on screen is the time code and annotation for the little gift at the end of the video if you want to skip all the technical jargon. And if you still have questions after this, you're free to put it in the comments. I try to read all of the comments, so I'll probably be able to see it. Again, thank you for all the support. Let's jump into the technical talk. I'm framing this both as a general introduction on how I approach these sorts of projects from a technical standpoint, and also give pointers if you would like to try something like this in the future, and I'll toss in some fun facts as we go along. Going back a step, I got into BTS around early February with the Spring Day trailer, and the first time I heard Cypher 3, the tune at the start reminded me immediately of a retro boss theme, and I associated it with this video game feeling for a couple of months. Fast forward to April when I finished the Blood, Sweat, and Tears set, which pushed a lot of my animation skills, and I felt like I needed to start another project. I was stuck between Cypher 3, Ultra Wings, and a Fire 3 animation set. I put a poll up on Twitter asking what people would want, and luckily for me, people wanted Cypher 3, and that was kind of the one I was biased towards. So when approaching these sorts of projects, it's best to narrow down your goals to some central points. So from the start, I wanted Cypher 3 to be two things. I wanted to do the song justice and complement it well from a visual standpoint, and I wanted to make it look cool, like you would want to play it. From these 2 points onwards, all the decisions about colors, style, timing, whether to add something or not, and what to do were all clear. From a UI and aesthetic inspiration, I took a lot from Hotline Miami and Blood Dragon, and in general, the trend to use hot pink and hyper-saturated colors, paired with black and purple to evict a sort of 80s energetic look. One of the things I noticed about similar animations is that people can use the video game aesthetic without putting much thought into what's actually happening to cue the viewer to believe it's a game and not just a game-like animation. I tried putting a fair amount of thought into making the UI and setup feel believable, because if it didn't sell itself, the entire idea of having it as a game is sort of pointless. The numbers, including the health gauges and XP numbers, are all taken from older games. I watch a lot of game reviewers and Let's Players, and one of them pointed out during his Final Fantasy playthrough that newer RPGs tend to inflate numbers, and it causes players to sometimes feel less endangered by events. Having 2,000 health and taking 1,000 damage is a different feeling from having 10 health and taking 5 damage, even though it's the same proportion. I wanted to write on this concept of low simplistic numbers for the setup. I settled upon a rotation-based fighter with very simple stats. The thing about fighters is that your character roster has to really resonate with the player and give incentives to use each character. Basically, they all can't act the same, and this is when the mechanics flow into the playstyles of the 3 rappers. I took from the rappers' personalities and performances in Cypher and tried to settle upon a way that they would play as a character, both in their attacks and in their animation. A major part of animating was trying to convey their personalities and how they moved. I also wanted to add in-game logic to the order in which they appeared, which played into designing their makeups. Namjoon is a calculated good leading player. The refreshes on his attacks are pretty short, and while he can't take as many hits, he can get something in and the player can learn what they're up against. His actual rapping style seems to me to have a lot of short builds and quick hits, and he's somebody who can consistently attack and react as he goes. Hosok is combo-based, and as he's a dancer, I thought it would be cool if to use him well, he would have to get in rhythm with both your playstyle and the enemies. His attacks require a large build-up to do, but if you can place them right, they're hard to counter. You can force the opponent to play to your beat if you could play him right. Hosok's rapping, especially leading to his end, is a lot of building up his energy, and I wanted to use that in how he plays and in his final attack. Yoongi is a bit odd, and his playstyle is probably the most obvious as he's a defensive character. His high defense makes a good last character, and he can chain assists easier. Due to wanting to have each of the vocal line appear individually, Yoongi ended up doubling up on appearances and didn't attack otherwise. His special attack charges faster, and his final attack acts as a last resort, with his stats switching, kind of based off the Pokemon Shuffle. This leaves him vulnerable, but it's the best way to finish a fight if you're neck and neck. And he's kind of inspired by Super Smash Bros. Brawl's Samus, where she does an all-out attack and then breaks her suit, becoming more vulnerable but faster after her smash. Supreme Boy attacks were based mainly off of his interjections and the idea of a summon holding the enemy in place and just wailing on it. His general look and poses were kind of based off of Little Mac, just because they felt like it fit the beat to how he was rapping and his general attitude. The enemy's attacks were very simple and straightforward, and there's not much to say about them. However, I do want to touch on the enemy's choice in design. I purposely chose the enemy not to be a specific person or resemble anyone, because Cypher 3 is a couple of years old at this point, and I don't know BTS's current attitude towards who they wrote the song for in the first place. I designed Cypher keeping in mind the very slim but eventually real chance that BTS would see it, and didn't want to speak for them on their opinions. I also didn't want it to make it some random anti-person, because it could unintentionally look like somebody who happens to like BTS, and seeing them beat someone who looks like you up doesn't sit right with me. My original draft was to have this big monster made out of concrete that would slowly break as they attacked, and then it became a dinosaur for like a solid 2 days, and then I settled upon this shadow-looking dude with stuff in the streets surrounding it like a shell. The last step before actually sitting down and drawing was deciding on the outfits for each of the players. I needed something pretty simple, and I had a color scheme already picked out and just worked with what I could. I wanted something that wasn't entirely mimicking another MV or era specifically, and I wanted something that felt unique while still being BTS. So Namjoon's jacket is from Spring Day with his bandana taken from Not Today. Hosok's outfit was actually from no place in particular, but his hair was from Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I'm actually kind of proud of what I picked out for his outfit because he filled out his resume for the Festa this year, and under outfit style, he drew something very similar to what I ended up putting him in, and that was about a month into Cypher and about a week before it was posted. Youngi's outfit was the last to design, and I had always had the hoodie in mind for his transformation, but the pink dot actually was because I needed to have one of them to have a pink accent, and it ended up just being Youngi. The actual full jacket is based off of Kumamon, which you can see in a couple of unused sprites. For Supreme Boy, I had little references to go off of, so I was just guessing. The only part I was really secure with was his Jordans from a picture of him and Namjoon from a while ago. But I was out of my depth in terms of what to do for his hair, and I just kind of guessed. I wanted to include him even if it wasn't entirely accurate, as he was the backbone of the song from a structural standpoint. After all the designs and ideas were mapped out, I could actually start animating, and I won't go into too much detail, but I'll do some overview explanations and examples. I first started off with a draft version, which you've been seeing, and from there I just started making stuff. I worked directly in Photoshop, and I used a photo editing technique for the backgrounds using photos that I've taken on trips. I've had a color palette already picked out by then, so it was just a matter of picking what would make the foreground work. I also built in the initial UI and setup from there, and then started working on the animation end. I tend to block when drawing, as in I don't do line work, and I fill in shapes as I draw them. For most of Cypher, I used very rough stick figures and then drew the actual finished keys on just above them. And I used the basic brush without any pressure to get a round, flat look. Each asset was in its own file and kept in a big folder properly labeled. So for example, Hosok's idle animation, all the frames are layers in its own Photoshop file labeled Hosok. And after a significant amount of assets were made, I brought them into an After Effects composition. And as I was going in order, it was Namjoon first. To explain how After Effects handled Cypher, I'm going to take a step back and do a quick rundown of my own understanding of the program. After Effects runs on a timeline and not frames, so events happen on a timeline instead of based on a frame delay. Compositions are like folders in a Photoshop file, but they contain timeline information. So a composition of a smoke effect that lasts 3 seconds can be duplicated and dragged and repeated wherever on the timeline the duplicate ends up, and it will still last 3 seconds there. For Cypher, every part was its own composition, and then it was all placed in a master file and acted independently from the other parts. Instead of each frame of the whole screen being redrawn, it was more working like a puppet show. This was my intention from the start, as games tend to treat different things as separate variables and not the entire screen as one object. Another important note is that After Effects doesn't actually save Photoshop files. I import it as part of the file. Instead, it references it when needed. This means that I could change things in the Photoshop file and it would update into the After Effects file. The only caveat being that if a layer or file is deleted, After Effects just loses it. It also meant that I had to keep all my files consistently in one place and know what they were called, so key smashing would have made this help. In fact, when making the Cypher 3 stickers this week, I may have broken the ending screen by accidentally saving a merged copy of the ending screen Photoshop file, getting rid of the colors running through it. Hopefully I won't need that again. It's important to explain how I actually made the still images move and change, which is through keyframes. There's a couple of types of keyframes, and I mainly use hold keyframes and ease keyframes. Keyframes in a timeline setup, like in After Effects, basically tell the program I want this object to have this value at this time. For an object to fade in 30 seconds, I set it to have 0 opacity at 0 seconds and 100% opacity at 30. A basic linear keyframe would take it from 0 seconds to 30 seconds evenly. Hold keyframes cause the value to be locked until touched again. So if the two keys I mentioned before were hold keyframes, it would remain at 0% opacity until the 30-second mark where it flips to 100% opacity as it hits that second hold keyframe. All the frame animations you see in Cypher that require a redraw use these hold keyframes to switch. Stuff like the smoke effects and idle animations use them a lot. In idle animations, each keyframe just turns off and on based on time, and it repeats itself as it goes. A more complex example of hold keyframes would be the lip syncing. Different lip movements were drawn and placed in one composition based on what I was hearing lyrically. I would pick the mouth movements that would best fit that set of time and use the hold keyframes to basically hide all the other lip movements as one of them was showing. That whole composition was then placed into the general movement of the character, and then I used hold keyframes to track the position of the mouth each frame changed. I played the lip syncing by ear because I'm not super familiar with Korean romanization, and I was spending way too much time trying to break down and understand that with the deadline approaching. In fact, some weird delays were happening with Yoongi's lip syncing, and I actually did his entire verse blind, and I couldn't check if I was right until I finished. I did not have the right audio delay working with me. So that's hold keyframes, which are parts probably the farthest in the compositions themselves. Tweening it with ease and linear keyframes usually come after and further along than hold keyframes, and it's where Cypher gets that clean, snappy look from. These keyframes are similar to linear keyframes as I explained earlier, but After Effects automatically adds a bit of weighting to the frames so that as it approaches a key, it will slow down and ease into it. The easiest and most prominent example of this is the crowd. As each little cameo jumps, they slow down at the peak of their jump arc as gravity overtakes their initial velocity. I use the ease keyframes to easily cause that arc to happen, as well as different parts of the UI quickly recoiling into place use ease keyframes. A complex example of the easing happens to be the enemy character, especially in the first two stages. Each component is going back and forth, up and down using these ease keyframes, causing it to gently glide into place instead of suddenly changing direction. A combination of both hold and ease keyframes could be in the parking pole in the second stage of the enemy. The two outer posts are being moved up and down through easing keyframes, but the actual chain connecting them is frame-by-frame animation using hold keyframes. I followed these core techniques and repeated for Namjoon's verse, the enemy, Hosok, Yoongi, and finished with the crowd and extra bits. I added a lot of references as I went, including Ryan and JK's Boy and Love Cup, and this quickly became a way for me to try to reference each major era of BTS's work, as I decided mid-May to have the deadline be the anniversary. For time reference, I started Cypher late April and was done with Namjoon's verse around late May, early June, and did the majority of it in around a 20-day haul after I graduated high school. There are a couple of bits that got cut that I just want to touch on. Specifically, Jimin was supposed to appear in his Perfect Man outfit, as well as Jungkook and Rainism performance, and a reference to the song Run was also cut out. The original plan was for the final special was to have Jin drive the vocal line in with his truck and do a donut, and have the vocal line jump off the back as well as him, but it got cut both on my end, having time constraints, and the song's length didn't have enough time for that to work feasibly. Jin's kiss blow at the end was actually supposed to summon the statue from Blood, Sweat, and Tears to come through the doors, but I replaced it with Taeyong. So yes, Jin is doing something there, he's just paired with Taeyong in that sense. As I finished all my other parts, it was time to get the outlines for the characters done. I used auto trace for this, which is a bit tricky. Auto trace is essentially making a mask or a series of masks based on a composition or layer selected, and then I added a stroke effect to it, which created the outlines. While it works, there's two really major issues with it. It completely locked up my After Effects program, and it was tricky to correctly do. I wouldn't be able to touch the file or work on it for a solid 30 minutes as it was auto-tracing the frames, and the only way to stop it would to be quit After Effects, which is never good. After the masks were made, however, I was consistently having trouble understanding why there was essentially ghosts of the masks via their strokes and in the animation. If you want to use auto-trace in the future, know that you have to assign a stroke to each mask individually and then copy the opacity values of the mask onto the strokes so that the strokes disappear when the masks aren't being used. Otherwise, they'll stay there. After the auto trace mess was solved, I just duplicated it 3 times and layered the outlines to create a black outline that you see in the final. The final After Effects thing I did was make the timer, which is actually just a code I found on Adobe's forums. So it was June 11th, and I needed to post Cypher on June 12th, my time, in order to make it for the anniversary. And I just had to export it out of After Effects at that time, which took over 20 hours. I had removed all the extra fluff and color adjustments, and it was still taking hours and hours just to get a little bit of footage out. And luckily, Rachie, who is a singer on YouTube, she makes really good covers and is an absolute angel, gave me some quick tips on trying to get it out while I was working at the time. I had to turn off real-time rendering and a couple of cache settings, as well as split it into smaller clips, which then I put into Premiere along with the audio and did some minor color adjustments in that program. At that point, I noticed there was an error with Jungkook's Boy in Love solo, but due to this sheer time it would take to re-export it, I actually just covered it up in the Premiere file. After uploading the video, I cut together a quick trailer and published it, and the rest you know. In the end, I really did challenge myself, and I'm proud of what I went for. In retrospect, I would have fixed a bit of timing here and there and some minor mistakes due to the deadlines I put myself against, but it works and I got it out of my system. Towards the end, I was working 16-hour days, and I probably clocked in at least 200 hours, so I'm glad I got it finished, and I'm glad I'm pretty much proud of it. So hopefully this video gave you a bit of insight on how I made Cypher and a place to start if you were considering a project like this. I'd like to know what you thought if you could leave a comment or a like, and you should consider subscribing if you don't want to miss whatever I put up next. Again, I just want to plug in my other sites. I'm more active on Twitter and Tumblr and Instagram if you want to keep updated with my work. For now, here's a little present for the next thing I'm working on.